9, 8.
You're watching the Experience Comic Culture and Sales. Streaming live daily to Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter.
2, 1.
What's up, the internet? It's producer Kyle. How's it going? You're probably wondering why I am here and not any of the normal people who are here. And it's because, well, when the opportunity to talk to our guest came up, I told them all that they'd have to fight me, and none of them wanted to. It's true. If you are a child of a certain age, which I am, you grew up on what I consider the greatest era of animation to ever have existed ever on the course of the planet. TMNT cartoons, the X-Men 90s, the original X-Men cartoons, the original Spider-Man cartoons, and then there was Disney. And now my family didn't have like Disney all the time money, but you got the Disney Channel previews money. So we had cable, but we only got the Disney Channel previews. And I would wake up at 5 in the morning to start watching the Disney Channel. And I would only stop when I was forced to go to bed under threat of corporal punishment. Because they had all of the shows I loved. And our guest today is responsible for some of the most iconic parts of that. And they have a Kickstarter that they're a part of right now running over on Kickstarter, and we're going to get to that in a minute. It's like 2.5 million funded or something. Like, it's an astronomical number. So we're going to get to all that in just a second. But this is Talkin Shop. All right, guys, welcome into Talking Shop. I am once again producer Kyle, and I am joined today by the person who created Darkwing Duck, but perhaps the person who could finally answer the age-old question that I've been asking everyone I know in the animation business since I was about 12. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in Tad Stones.
Hello, everybody. Happy to be here.
So I'm going to just start with the most hard-hitting question I have prepared, and you can tell me. Why did Launchpad McQuack never get his own spinoff?
You know what? Disney was not oriented towards spinoffs, period. In fact, sorry for Launchpad lovers, Darkwing Duck started when Jeffrey Katzenberg told me to do a show called 00 Ducks. Now, Launchpad McQuack was the star of a DuckTales episode called 00 Duck. Jeffrey liked names that he thought would intrigue an audience. The idea that you'd get a few more people to try out your show, but then it was up to you to convince them to stay. But he said, no, it can't be Launchpad McQuack. The whole point is to create a new character. So Launchpad hung around. We went through all sorts of permutations on the development of that show. He once had a huge team behind him, and Launchpad was there as his wingman flying a plane. But then as we cut the show down to include what Jeffrey demanded, which was a big bunch of Disney heart, that brought in Goslin. And so it was Darkwing, his daughter, and Launchpad, because he was like having a big name character actor guest star. So, but he perfectly played into it. We changed Launchpad a bit. We redesigned him. He got buffer. He got stupider, and he became a much better pilot than he was in DuckTales. Talking to Frank Angonis, who was co-producer on the DuckTales 2017, when talking of Darkwing Duck, he always said, "Oh, Tad, we know Darkwing is the story of a father and a daughter and a launchpad. That's the heart of the show." And Frank would say that, yeah, we took the worst of all worlds. He was even dumber in our show, Launchpad, that is, and a really bad pilot. So everybody has their own favorite version of Launchpad. But anyway, to answer your question in a simple way, is Disney wasn't oriented to doing spinoffs.
Okay, so I can start blaming Jeffrey Katzenberg.
Yes.
Okay.
And Michael Eisner, that whole old regime, yeah.
I can live with that. No, it's my favorite Launchpad was Darkwing Launchpad, because I missed so much of DuckTales.
Hmm.
Again, as I said in the open, my family, I didn't grow up with the Disney Channel, right? It was a thing we got a few times a year when they would give us a free preview. And I loved it. And I was begging my parents, but they just couldn't make it happen. So it wasn't until I was a little bit older and Darkwing had happened and was on that we got Disney Channel regular. And
Now, I'm sorry, were you in a town that got a syndicated Disney afternoon?
I don't know. I was a PBS afternoons kid.
Oh, okay.
Um, I my mom's a literacy teacher.
No.
So it was, hey, you need to watch these shows that are based on literary things and not fun. And
Oh,
then I'd
okay.
go to grandma's and grandma would let me watch Disney a little bit more, you know?
Mhm.
But no, it was Darkwing had already kind of sort of happened. And so I was watching that as it happened. And that became my favorite character on my favorite show was the big dumb jock pilot guy because I related
Mhm.
to him as a big dumb jock, you know, let me run into this wall full speed and see what happens kind of guy. Um,
Yeah.
but Darkwing spun out, as it were. Essentially, you created another character off of a one-shot character from DuckTales, correct?
Well, it wasn't even there was no it was just literally the title. It was just Double O Duck. And in fact, the earliest drawings of Darkwing was like a generic Disney duck. I mean, passing glance, you just assume it was Donald in a white tuxedo, but he had on a cape, a mask, and a hat, uh, a tastefully small fedora. Um, and it was actually one of my story editors when we were brainstorming how to develop the show away from the spy stuff that said that costume looks more like an old pulp hero, like the Shadow or the Green Hornet. And it was like light bulb for me in that I knew the Shadow. It was before my time, but I had heard tapes of the radio shows and I knew some of the pulp magazine, reprints and paperbacks and all that. Uh, and that slid us into a new, less of a parody element of James Bond, and gave us some new tropes to play with. Then eventually, after Disney was out there selling the show, they got I don't know if they literally got a letter or it was a phone call, but it was a cease and desist from using the Double O name because that was owned by the producers who had the rights to all the Bond properties. So we needed a new name. We had a contest. Alan Burnett, who later went on to do the animated adventures of Batman with Bruce Timm, he came up with the name Darkwing. And I said, that's great. That's what this guy thinks he is. I'm going to put duck on it to make it sillier because that's closer to the truth. Um, and once that happened, we kept, the spy trappings because my feeling was, shush, the spy agency is what funded all his gimmicks. Anyway, that kind of let me go more into the silver age of comics, which were the comics when I was the youngest, just, right out of Casper Spooky and Wendy and and the Disney comics. I went into basically the DC Silver Age, and back then, very little continuity to the comics, crazy ideas. Several of the characters evolved to have super giant heads. Superman. Then they did it with Lois. They did it with the Flash. They'd recycle the stories. Every other cover had a gorilla on it because they thought gorillas improve sales. Jimmy Olsen turned into a giant turtle creature. I mean, Flash grew a beard. Flash got super fat. Flash became a marionette. These are all covers that I half remembered basically, and the stories that I half remembered. Because when Darkwing started, the internet was all text based. I couldn't call up covers or stuff like that, which is probably good because I'd get paranoid of, well, I can't do that idea. It's been done. We have to do something like that, but different. And as opposed to a foggy memory of something, we just played with all those tropes.
Yeah, I often tell people when we're working on new ideas for the experience, I would much rather have a vague memory of something I'm trying to rip off than actually be able to look at it
Yes,
because you can't plagiarize what you don't remember.
exactly. You
And,
don't want that
and
electronic paper trail to
right.
lead back to you.
And at the same time, you probably can't live up to what to the thing you're trying to remember. So just
Yeah.
make your own version of it, and you win. Have you ever thought about going back and taking a pass at James Bond, the duck, a little bit more of that traditional Double O Ducks concept?
No, actually, because what happened was Jeffrey said do a show based on that, and I was like 0% interested. What I couldn't say no, but I went into it and just shrugged and said that's a James Bond parody because despite the owners of the rights, they didn't pay attention to any show that did like a little parody episodes or something, or you threw around the double O name. So I just did a straight parody and, with different characters in there. I think we might have added Gizmo Duck for a while. Launchpad was in the background there. But it didn't have anything to it. It wasn't until we, added his daughter that we actually had a show. And what happened is before that, Jeffrey said, this is terrible. I thought wasn't excited about it. He wasn't either. And luckily, for whatever reason, he told me to do it again, as opposed to getting somebody else to do it, which is more the typical thing to do. So going into that second time made me come with something more original. So I really don't have I enjoyed the James Bond movies, but it didn't sing to me as much as comic books did.
Absolutely. And I think the introduction of more of the Drake Mallard family dynamic is really what has given the character, the title, the comics, the shows its length, right? Its longevity. When you add Morgana, so. When you add, some of these, or his girlfriend.
Just building up. Yeah, exactly. The different characters. And really, I did not know this. I mean, I started Disney Features right after Ron Clements, the famous director. He started like 5 months. We used to share an office. He started 5 months before me. Glenn Keane, amazing animator, started like 3 months after me. And I always say those guys could go into a theater and sit in an audience and just feel the reaction of people had to their work. I didn't get any of that, frankly, until I retired and went to my first convention as a guest. I had people coming up to my table and several, especially women, coming up and, getting misty-eyed because that father-daughter relationship meant so much to them. And that's been repeated every time I go to a con. So, that part was, I'm shocked at the, reaction, but that was totally intentional. I said, look, I wanted Gosling to be like Calvin of Calvin and Hobbes, that wild of personality. And I knew they were going to drive each other crazy, but I said, you can never doubt that they don't love each other. That will show them hugging, which isn't all that common in animated shows at the time. And they'll just say it, and that soft-hearted thing. It also got around the whole, her personality got around the Batman Robin thing. Because especially you go back to classic Batman when Robin was, introduced. It's like, yes, I am a avenger of the night. I strike fear into the hearts of criminals. You know what I need is I need a 9-year-old in a bright suit to come with me. Not something we'd really generate today. But with Gosling, no, she was supposed to stay home.
Right. This is called child care.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this is like not, basically he couldn't send her home without letting the villain get away.
Right. And I think that's an interesting aspect of the character of Darkwing, of Drake Mallard, and of Gosling, right? Is that it didn't feel odd that he would take her with him on these adventures because, well, when it's your kid, it's not called babysitting. It's called being a parent.
It's true.
And I look back on my own life and my dad taking me as a young kid to bars and to poker night with his buddies and the thing, because my mom had to work or my mom, had to deal with my little sister or whatever. And these are the places my dad is going. Mm-hmm. And the skills that as an adult, I was able to go, oh, that was what I learned when I was 5 and dad was taking me to these places, is how to interact with people you don't like or how to
stay alive in a tough situation. Yeah.
Well, or, how to carry yourself in public when you're maybe not at your best or, things like that. And I feel like Darkwing kind of imparted that in Goslin as well, this sense of adventure, but this also sense of self-preservation. Know your surroundings, know what you're doing, even if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah. He would teach all that to her and she'd promptly ignore it and just dive in.
Correct, like all children. Um, let's go back to before all of this. How did you find yourself in, Jeffrey Katzenberg's office, Michael Eisner's office? How did you find yourself in animation? How did you find yourself at Disney?
Um, I always enjoyed animation. My dad wanted to be a comic strip artist, or actually an editorial cartoonist. He graduated after working on the humor newspaper at USC and the Daily Trojan. He graduated basically in the Depression, so it was less about putting, you're chasing your dream than putting food on the table. Um, he ended up in advertising, which you would work with art and all that. But what he had were all these books. I had the famous artist cartoonist course, which just tells you from start to finish how to do a comic strip and letter it and do all that. So that was the kind of book I was. Oh, actually, I have this. He had this book, which you can see is in good shape, being held together. But it was about animation. And you flip through this and you say, oh, I've seen a million versions of that character, that people like looked at character designs and put them on the sides of plumber trucks and things like that. But that told me the basics of animation. I love cartoons and all that. In my high school years, though, I figured that the only place I wanted to work as far as animation was concerned was Disney, because they were the only ones doing full animation. I mean, Hanna-Barbera, Filmation, those studios owned the airwaves, but they were doing limited animation. Guys at my school used to dive into the dumpsters at Hanna-Barbera and would come out with stacks of cells. And if you wanted a full figure of Fred Flintstone, that sometimes was a stack this thick, because the eyes blink would be on one level, his nose and mouth, or his mouth certainly would be on another level, his head would be on a separate level, the body would be on one. Depending on what he was doing, his arms and legs might be separate. So I wasn't interested in that sort of thing. But it was all around me. Here's kids bringing in animation cells to school. But by the time I got to college, unbeknownst to me, Disney started a training program with one of the, Walt's, what he called the 9 Old Men, which is a moniker given to the Supreme Court at the time. That Eric Larson basically would work, a lot of that group would look at portfolios submitted and later on personal animation tests they did. And Eric would work with those people and teach them the basics of animation. If you had 4 weeks to do a test, if you survived that, you had another 4 weeks to do a second. And then you went into production as an in-betweener. And when all the animation is being done in the studio, you learn animation by doing your job, because you're in betweening the poses of the animator. And then to get ahead, you had to do personal tests, in your own time. Anyway, I found out about that training program because my girlfriend at the time, her suite mate was the daughter of Ex Atencio, who was a layout man and ride designer. We did a lot of the space television shows with Ward Kimball. So she knew about this training program and gave me a phone number that I could call. And I basically was calling for information. And instead I wound up with an appointment. And at the time I wasn't an art major. I hadn't been an art major since freshman year. And luckily I was a TA in ceramics, and the ceramics teacher at the time had just taken over the art department. So he was a huge Disney fan, and got me to be able to sit on like drawing classes to hurriedly put together this portfolio to take to Disney. Anyway, I got in, squeaked in, survived my 8 weeks, became an in-betweener, almost got fired because I was so bad at in-betweening. Eventually moved into story, moved over to Epcot, or WED at the time, now called Imagineering, helped design rides for Epcot, moved back to TV. And then when they started talking about TV animation, went to the early meetings about that and eventually transferred over. And going back to the beginning of that tale, that girlfriend is now my wife. So win-win.
It's amazing how things that are supposed to happen, right? You just so happen to be in the right position to have the right set of bricks fall into place to
Yeah.
put you where you were supposed to be.
Well, Ron Clemens, who I mentioned, did Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Moana, and everything in between. Ron kept calling Disney. He came out from Kansas City to work in animation, and he would call the Disney employment line and say, "Are there any openings in animation?" And they would say no, because nobody told them about the training program or whatever. So here, Ron started working over at Hanna-Barbera while they were looking for, people to to become in their program. I forgot how he found out about it. And there was one article about the training program in like a cinematographer magazine or whatever Hollywood trade publication. And so many people stumbled on that article in weird ways. I remember one guy was literally a projectionist and pulled it out of the trash can and learned about it. So it was, yeah, you're right. In the early days, especially, fate, wove her hands over the right people to make things happen.
It still happens. I mean, that's how I came to be in broadcasting. I was taking graphic design for small business classes, and there was an internship that led to a free ride to a broadcasting school to learn radio. And then they filled out my paperwork wrong, and I wound up in a graphic design course. But I was working in radio, so I learned radio. And then once I had the graphic design, I could move over to television, and the rest kind of happens, right? It just, the right sort of circumstances happen together. When you look at sort of that process of sort of developing Disney animation for television and, the early days of, some of these studios and these guys who are now, if you're an animation nerd, prolific and massive names. And it's like, oh man, I would have killed to have been a fly on the wall back then.
Yeah, I learned a lot of my feature animation stuff from Frank Thomas via Ron Clemens, because on my second personal test, my first personal test, now art students, majors know so much about animation, and computers allow them to film their own stuff, color it, give it backgrounds, do fantastic camera moves. We just had pieces of paper and a pencil. And my first test was just an alligator on two legs with a pirate hat and just basically doing a little jig, throwing a sword up in the air and catching it with his tail. And the review board felt like I had given a personality in just the way he moved, even though what he did was not impressive necessarily. They said, oh, we get a feeling for his personality, which is what Disney was all about. My second one, I got really ambitious. Everybody was talking about these books, The Black Cauldron. I had this like Igor type character coming down these steps and holding a giant bone that he sticks in a giant cauldron that he's going to stir. And then he looks up, and the stiffest animation of the world of this wizard with horns on his head, raising his hands, lightning bolt effect, and then he turns into a T-Rex. So it went really well. It showed growth, but at the same review board, Ron Clemens showed his first personal test since getting through those first 8 weeks. So he did this thing that, without exaggeration, he did a scene of Horace from 101 Dalmatians and Cruella de Vil. And basically Horace is leaning against a trash can. Cruella is walking toward camera, slips in a puddle, lands on her butt. Horace kind of tries to stifle a laugh, and she slams a garbage pail lid on his head. Simple as that. Without exaggeration, it could have been in the original feature film. And the whole review board felt the same. When they brought in Mark Davis, who actually did Cruella de Vil, he was a little more, well, she wouldn't do that. She wouldn't, it's like, what, she wouldn't slip in a puddle? But anyway, it was so impressive. So when Frank and Ollie came in the room the next day to say something like, here are the geniuses of animation, and then they went right to Ron's desk, which was right behind mine, because it was amazing. And Frank snatched him up to be his assistant, basically, to work with him. And Ron literally started getting scenes immediately. He didn't have to go through in-betweening or breakdowns or whatever. He had done that before on like Winnie the Pooh shorts as he was working there. Anyway, Ron would go in with Frank. They would talk for an hour or whatever about everything about animation and more. And Ron would come back and I would grill him. He would have to repeat everything to me, which he was happy to do because he told me repeating that all kind of cemented it in his mind. So yeah, I worked by proxy with Ron. Got a lot from Frank.
So those early tests, were those flipbook tests, or were you actually doing cells and laying them out?
No, it was just pencil tests. So you were flipping. My favorite part of animation is always, or was always, because I wasn't great at flipping. You know, you've seen the pictures of people with a big stack of papers flipping it with their thumbs. My thumbs are too flat or something. What I loved is while you're animating, you're basically what's called rolling the papers through your fingers. So you have a sheet of paper between all your fingers and you're rolling them. And sometimes you're rolling them in different order, depending on what drawing you put on top. But literally your drawings are moving. It looks like they are coming to life. So, I mean, that was just fantastic. So that's all it was. There was no fanciness of it. It's just rough drawings of the personal test. The tragic thing about personal tests, I have one of mine that I did, neither of those first one, but they were put on, after a while, video came in and personal tests were put on videotape. The early ones, and this goes back to Don Bluth doing tests, Dale Bear, Chuck Harvey, you can look up these animation names, John Pomeroy, Gary Goldman, all these guys did these personal tests and they were just kept on the same film reel. I got mine handed back to me on a piece of roll. I'm just a roll of film and a piece of magnetic tape. I don't know why it came back to me, but I guess when I went to one of the other divisions or something. Since then, Ron and John Musker, his partner on many films, they were working on a book, and Ron eventually took over the book, but they were interviewing everybody because they wanted to cover the period of time after Walt's death, before, I guess, Little Mermaid is my guess, what happened in those years, you know, from Jungle Book, Aristocats, Robin Hood, and all that. So they were interviewing everything, and I was one of the few people that had a test, so they digitized it. So I have that. That original reel was the only copy of all those personal tests. You're talking about real film spliced together with glue. It's lost. Nobody knows what happened to it. So you've got all the earliest work by all these guys, Glenn Keanes and Randy Cartwright, who went on to do the carpet in Aladdin. All that's just vanished. So I was very lucky. I have one of mine to just prove that they existed. But that was it on the personal test. We're kind of hoping actually that somebody stole them or something, and it'll surface when some collector dies.
It'll show up at Christie's in 5 years and sell for $1 billion. You know.
Yeah, that wouldn't be
Something
bad.
like
At least
that.
it would exist. Yeah.
Right. Better than it's, oh well, we exposed it to light and it's gone. You know, or
yeah,
it got thrown away.
Sure. Yeah, that's probably what happened. Is just I was in radio in college, you know, and we did all of our PSAs and commercials and all that, and little goofy things that we did with sound effects and all that were all on these reused reels that had been donated to the school from a television company. And, you know, they're marked archives 1 through, and they had like the original airing at the AM radio station all the way through, well, past my time. And I was invited back and visited the radio station, I don't know, 5, 6 years later. And I asked about that stuff, thinking that, oh, it'd be fun to like duplicate that and have some of that. And they had no clue what I was talking about. Somebody just went through a bunch of old tape boxes, you know, there they went.
Right.
That's twice.
No, when I first started, we were already in an age of digital editing, but the old timers I worked with in radio were like, you need to know how to cut tape.
Yeah.
And so it was, I learned how to do all that kind of stuff. And it's an invaluable skill that you can't use anymore. But
Yeah. Hey, I was
um,
very lucky when I went to TV animation. My first shows were still on film, and I got to see that process in magnetic tape, and it's things that you wouldn't think twice about editing. Like, let me see what that looks like, snipping a frame out there and snipping a frame out there. It's no big deal now. But back then means, okay, I have to physically cut the tape, I have to glue it. And if you change your mind, it's going to be
now
really,
you
I'm
gotta
not really going to be able to put it back. And then somebody ultimately had to cut the negative to match what you had done to the film. Uh, so the editing techniques were totally different, you know?
so Darkwing Duck came around again. You know, it was this idea based off of Double O Ducks and some of these other stories that had existed when it kind of found a new life with a younger generation, like in reruns. And then there was the 2016, 2017
Yeah.
story that was done. And there have been a number of revisits to Darkwing and other properties where he has shown up. How
Yeah.
how has that kind of changed the way or affected the way you view the original creation, affected the way you look at the franchise now?
Well, for me, obviously I created a lot of characters for Disney. Not, I mean, I did the Rescue Rangers. I did the third season of Gummy Bears, where here and there we probably added some characters. Um, and always knowing that these aren't my properties. This is, you know, Disney's property. Do what they will with it. So they can reboot it. They can do a live action Darkwing with people in duck bills, you know, whoever. Um, so the fun thing was when after, well, like I say, I retired and suddenly it's like people remember the show. That was huge. And then Boom came out with their run of Darkwing, and they modernized it in that they, very unlike the show, they gave it heavy continuity and, you know, weaving storylines through several issues and all of that. So it was interesting, and I met with the guys. You know, I did a story with James Silvani, who was the artist on all that. And they're real open to ideas. I chat with them back and forth, and but it's their version of Darkwing Duck. Uh, I mean, I did two Hellboy animated films with Mike Mignola, and Mike refers to him as that's Tad Stone's Hellboy, just like it's Guillermo del Toro's live action movies, you know. And now there's a new Hellboy coming on. The only real Hellboy is Mike's, you know, his stories. Everybody else has a version, and he lets them have that version. Um, and that's kind of how I am with Darkwing. You know, currently there's a Darkwing show in development. I haven't heard anything more about it since, I'm going to say, about a year. And since then, it's gone through different creative leads. So, you know, if they want my input, they can, you know, call me up or show me something and all that. And what I try to do is understand the direction they're going and saying, okay, here's what was the heart of the show you're not quite getting. And that's not to order them to do it, because a consultant is just a guy you're paying to give an opinion, and then you can ignore him. It's just to say, be aware of what you're doing. Like, that's what it is. And maybe they'll go, oh, we can put that in. That makes it closer. Or, yeah, we realize that we're just going in this direction. But as far as the current Darkwing development, all I can cross my fingers, it's being done by Point Grey Pictures. You know, the company Seth Rogen is with. And I think what they did with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the Mutant Mayhem movie, was fantastic. I mean, it was kind of an obvious thing where they said, hey, what if we cast them like they were teenagers? Not superheroes that we call teenagers. I just thought it was brilliant. It was a great look. And I saw a trailer for their 2D animated show that I think comes out at the end of summer. That looked great too. So I'm just hoping that whatever magic they worked with Turtles, that they can throw a little on my duck while it's over there.
Well, and I think, you know, I kind of let off the cold open with, if you're a child of a certain age, and Seth Rogen is.
Yeah.
He grew up on this stuff, and I think he probably remembers it fondly the way I do and the way so many others do. So if there's anybody I would trust with it, it would be him.
Yeah.
If for no other reason, then we tend to come at things the same way, right?
Exactly. And when Dynamite took it over, they made little changes in these collections that they've put together. Because I had bought some of them, but then in prep for the Kickstarter, I said, I'm going to be talking to a lot of people. It'd be great if I read more. And they kind of gave me the reviewer package, which is like 4 of each. And I'd already subscribed to Jeff Parker's Negaduck. And I had bought a couple of issues of Amanda Divert's Darkwing run. I didn't buy the Justice Ducks because I have a pet peeve about paying Disney for characters I created, which I sometimes go against and actually spend money on something. But I noticed the little changes they've done, and they've all worked great. They don't violate what's the heart of the story. But like in Negaduck, Jeff Parker made Negaduck more Darkwing, which makes sense. We played him very one note. My cliche comment is always, given a choice, Negaduck will always choose chainsaw.
Right.
He was just one note, and that was the fun of him. He would treat everybody rotten. And Jeff went in and said, well, he's a reflection of Darkwing. It's not like his personality has to be everything about his personality has to be the opposite. It's like, no, he's an evil reflection of Darkwing. So he gave him more of that ego back in, and it's, I'm only up to a certain part, what they've released so far. But it's great. And he invented a bunch of villains too. Amanda Dibert, God, you mentioned Morgana Macabre before. She nailed that character in that. I mean, I would have hired her to work on the show, if she had a time machine, could go back. Because she kept Morgana being that Catwoman to Batman, Morgana to Darkwing feel, which kept her dangerous, so to speak. And then the biggest surprise, and possibly my favorite of the 3 series, is Justice Ducks, that Roger Langridge. They're the closest to, for me, Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge comics, Carl Barks stuff, where you get into the story in like a page and a half. You are on an adventure, and every page is just full of fun. And he changed some of the character dynamics, which solved a lot of problems. And it's just got one of the funniest guys in comics, I think.
It's true. And I will say this for the Dynamite adaptations, is that they really have gone out of their way with Gargoyles, with Darkwing, with the Hades stuff and the Hercules stuff they're doing from Disney. Their Disney licenses, I think they've gone out of their way and above and beyond what other publishers have done in the past to hold on to that original kernel of truth that were these shows, right? The thing that made them what they were. Nick and his team, Jim and Nate and all of the editors there, do a really good job of going, hey, don't forget, this is what this is.
Yeah.
And
actually, one thing Roger does is most of Roger's are standalones, much like the show, that it's an adventure in a comic. And then the next, I hit one of a 2-parter or something like that. But, that's great to be able to have that self-contained thing. That's the experience I had when I was a kid, when I was, buying those old comics. All the early days of Marvel, it was a huge thing that they ever did a 2-parter. I think the first one was, I want to say, Fantastic Four versus the X-Men. And it was like, they actually said, okay, do you like these or not? And a lot of fans said, no, we don't want to have to buy 2 things. And it's like, of course, the industry changed and Marvel became the soap opera capital of the superhero world. So I really appreciate what they do now. In a lot of ways, has that spirit that we were playing with in the show.
Yeah. I'm a believer that every comic should be able to be somebody's first.
Yeah.
And similarly, I believe that if you're flipping through the channel on television and you come across an animated show or even a sitcom that's built for younger viewers, you should be able just to dive in and understand who is who and what is what and what they're doing.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have to have, 30 years of back knowledge with these characters
Exactly.
to understand them. Speaking of the Dynamite Darkwing Duck stuff and uh, the ongoing stories they're telling in this universe, Amanda Dibert and some of these other books, the Kickstarter for the hardcover collected editions, the graphic novel collections, has 45 hours left. And it is 1,137% funded. Just
Well, they're trying to hit 300,000 because that's the last of the stretch goals,
right.
and or 2,000, subscribers, whatever you call them, backers,
Right.
I guess.
Right. So they're at 1,900 backers and 284 grand. So we've got a little bit of ways to go, guys, and 45 hours to do it. I know Dynamite can do it because they've, a lot of last minute backers, a lot of last minute folks, myself included. I didn't back it till today. So,
all right.
Well, I
They were
wanted to
waiting
make
for
sure
you.
that I was going to make sure, I wanted to make sure I had the money in my account when they were going to go pull it.
There you go.
You got to wait for payday sometimes. But the big question I guess I have for you as it relates to this is, what was your first impression when you saw the numbers? When you saw funded in seconds? When you saw what people were doing?
I was obviously super pleased. I mean, that it's like, wow, that's many people are waiting for them. Of course, that was built up from the DuckTales reboot and reintroduced Darkwing. Boom, did their run of Darkwing. So it wasn't like he had been just vanished since the 90s.
Right.
But still, it was super exciting. Actually, what I'm most astounded by what Nick and company have done is that they pretty much committed on day one, not just to do Darkwing, that, they put in Negaduck and Justice Ducks right into production. That's, to me, was amazing, and how much they believed in the project. I'm hoping, especially if we hit that 300,000 mark, that it shows enough excitement about all this that I would like to see each of the Justice Ducks, except for Darkwing, let each of them have like a 6-issue limited series, because each of them could be so different. Morgana Macabre could have a totally supernatural one, and Neptunia, the aquatic character, has an undersea adventure that doesn't just, it could be like the ghost of Davy Jones under the sea, for that matter, but just something really inventive. Gizmo Duck could have something where you play with Iron Man conceits or Superman conceits too, because he was kind of like Superman in our show, in that he got all the glory that Darkwing Duck felt like he deserved. All the, if that excitement can continue, I would love to see this universe grow, because it's in good hands. They're all doing great work, and I think each of the people have said they'd love to do more.
I'm going to put it out there into the ether. And usually when I do this, Nick calls me and yells at me because I've tipped my hat to something that I don't even know about that's happening and he can't talk about yet. But I would love to see David Avalone and Cassandra Peterson write a Morgana story, so that it's actually Elvira and the person writing the Elvira comics telling the Cassandra story. I think they'd be off.
That'd be awesome.
Off the charts. Yeah.
Hey,
Stegmutt, get Tony Fleece to write Stegmutt.
Oh, funny. I think the craziest idea Nick had was when he was talking about crossovers. He said, I don't know, Darkwing Duck Gargoyles. And Greg Wiseman, obviously creator of Gargoyles, he was new to the department, but he was our executive in charge of Darkwing. In other words, each show had an executive who would know the show, but wasn't involved with it in a creative way, so that you always had like an objective eye of someone
like
who
an alpha team.
Well, it's just more like someone who to just say, hey, you sold this as an adventure show, and these last 3 scripts have all been set in a kitchen, whatever. But what was great about Greg is he had been like an assistant editor at DC Comics. So he knew all the Silver Age stuff we were talking about. He knows all the comic tropes. And he gave us an incredible amount of leeway, but would argue passionately for things, and Greg can wear you down with his passion about things that he felt like this could be better, or you went in this direction and really shouldn't it be this direction. So the idea of a crossover would have to be some sort of both groups falling out of their dimension into some third one, like a Mad magazine. And it's kind of like Hellboy waking up from a dream. You know, the gargoyles would go, "Whoa, what was that?" You know, and just
Right,
saying,
exactly.
"Okay, shake that
I'm
off."
just trying to think of what other properties Dynamite has in the Disney universe that could pull them all together. And all I could think of is they all get abducted by Lilo and Stitch.
There you go. Well, Stitch
That
alone,
that could be an
he'd be
interesting
fun. A
that could be
crossover where he goes through the different things would be,
that
fantastic.
I would spend a not small amount of money on that.
Well, there you go.
You mentioned it earlier, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask about my second favorite character in all of comics, which is Hellboy. And your work on the Hellboy animated movies. What was that like? It's so different.
Let me switch backgrounds here. Yeah, so yeah, talking about Hellboy.
Well, it's Hellboy and Darkwing Duck are so different to my mind. Just in terms of the personality of the character and kind of the underarching sort of goals of the character.
Well, I mean, I enjoyed it. I mean, I was a Hellboy fan. I mean, a lot of times when you go to a convention, and now Marvel Universe has changed everything. But before the huge Marvel Universe things, you go to a convention and some film producer would say, "I'm doing a Captain America movie and I'm a huge fan." And what it really meant is, yeah, they heard about the rights, they bought the rights, and he's read a few comics. I mean, there was one version of Captain America where the director admitted, "Oh, I wanted to get him out of that costume as soon as possible." It was like, okay, you're missing something here.
Right.
But when it was put out that I was a fan, I had been on the Hellboy.com bulletin board forever since then. Used to do little drawings of Hellboy Jr. and do little comic strips of him. In fact, I think I have one behind me. Hold on. Nothing like visual aids. So slick.
Hey, I love them.
There you go.
Oh, that's fantastic.
That was my
I'm
version
gonna make
of
you real big.
Hellboy Jr. There you go.
And now
That
for
was
something
my
completely
little
different.
thing. Yeah.
Like I love the Monty Python reference too, by the way.
Oh, of course. And I had a friend.
Oh, that's cute.
Oops, let's get it over to the camera. Anyway. And actually this for those in the LA area, this weekend they open up a Hellboy gallery in Santa Monica that and you can find references online if you search for a Hellboy gallery showing. Santa Monica CoPro Gallery, I think it's called. Anyway, there's like 40 artists that have all done pieces of art because they've either worked on Hellboy, they're related to Hellboy, that somebody Mike's admired. Well, because I was very honored to be invited because of the Hellboy movies. But they're fantastic. I mean, the Darkwing and Hellboy are my two favorite projects of my career. And mostly because with I mean, they're entirely different. But Hellboy, I could write. Darkwing was written to my taste, but you're trying to be funny. You have to include kids, but sometimes people watch Darkwing and say, "Was that really written for kids?" We're still entertaining ourselves. Hellboy was, no, I'm doing a horror film with this comic character, and I tried to really keep what I loved about the comics, the quirkiness and all that. And the challenge is to whereas Scooby-Doo would go into a haunted house and Scooby-Doo and Shaggy would be saying, "Oh, Scoob, we're in a haunted house." Ooh. Whereas, no, we went into a haunted house, looks like a normal house, and then weird things happen. And, the film could be a storyboard for a live action film. So we did 2 films. We did one that was kind of an ode to Hellboy's short stories, where he deals with Japanese monsters. And in fact, we adapted a Mike Mignola short story as close as possible in that one. And then the second one was called Sword Storms. The second one was Hellboy Blood and Iron. And that one goes to Hellboy's roots in terms of vampires, werewolves, Eastern European culture. And it was just so much fun. Then we were supposed to do more. We wrote a third one that Mike had a lot more input in, I think, than the first 2. I mean, he read everything, gave me notes on everything. And that one was going to be the mad scientist Nazi side of Hellboy. And that introduced Lobster Johnson and, cyber apes and floating heads in jars and all of that. And that one we wrote our version of his origin, which was slightly different. But the company I was working for sold themselves to Stars, who basically bought the company for their backlog of movie. They were kind of surprised that, wait, you guys do animation too? And I think the only reason why the animation studio wasn't shut down is they're the studio that does The Simpsons, not the writing of The Simpsons, but the actual production of The Simpsons cartoon. And it's like, everybody knows The Simpsons. So we never got to do that third one, but those are great projects. We even did a short subject in there too. So I love that show, and I still got to do, all sorts of odes to my interests, not just to Hellboy, but to the supernatural stories and things like that. But really, I'm here for.
Oh, I know. And that was actually going to be my question. I was going to say, we got about 5 minutes left. I guess my big question is can you compare the process between breaking a Darkwing Duck story and breaking a Hellboy story? Because that's the part that always fascinates me when I talk to creatives, right? Compare the process.
Well, with Hellboy, we didn't have a writer's room. I mean, and we did not have a long schedule at all. Basically my story editor would come pitch me ideas. I might have an idea that I pitch them, but certainly anything they came in with, usually it wasn't me saying, "Oh, that's perfect as is." We'd go back and forth. It would give me an idea or something. We had already talked various villains. They would look at the villains other people had written about and say, "Oh, can I use him too?" That sort of thing. So that was like a live stream improv, as we're talking across the desk. And then all along, I give notes on the outline. I gave notes on scripts. And then because my art background, I'd also do notes on the storyboards and do little sketches and, push things where I could. Again, wish I had more time. I was just thinking of one of the episodes that it's like, I know what the guy did and that shouldn't have been cut out. But it's one of those things like, well, you were in charge. Why didn't you just fix it? Because we had no time. We could put Band-Aids on things if someone had made a huge mistake. But we really didn't have the time or budget to say, oh, let's hold off on this one. We were not going to ship this one as we fix it. Now with Hellboy, it was, I went over to Mike's house and I had some books. I think I had some Japanese mythology, some Norse mythology. But as soon as I brought up the Japanese stuff first, and Mike immediately grabbed that because he had only done the one little short story there. And he said, they've got the craziest stuff. So then it was about playing around with ideas, worked with writer Matt Wayne on that one. And then it was a pretty much straight process where, like I do any other script, he writes a script, I give notes. Basically, they would do an outline, a first draft, a second draft, maybe a little touch up. This is like stuff you put in the contract. And then it was mine, and it would go through my computer if necessary. And I was always thinking visually to make sure I was writing specifically for my storyboard artists so they didn't understand what I was going through there. And then work with the director on it, both of whom had worked on Darkwing Duck with me, Phil Weinstein and Vic Cook. And the second one was I used a different writer, Kevin Hops, who is, again, one of my story editors on many of my shows. We worked out the story together. He wrote the script and it became mine, and the stuff got done. So Hellboy was way more traditional, and of course Mike had input on many of those steps, but still, it was it's hard for me to watch any of my old shows. The farther you go back, the harder it is for me, because just now there's plenty of stuff, and part of this is modern sensibilities, but I would just love to cut 5 minutes out of it or something, just to tighten up character action and the cutting or whatever, or probably there's too much music in that, because as I went along, I used music. I had great composer on projects, but it's like, okay, those early days where we were working with a lot of reused music from other episodes, it's like, oh, we could have been silent through here, just depended on sound effects. So, every project is different, and those things were, in a lot of ways, Hellboy was more traditional, but I felt I did a good job of, my goal as a fan was to be as close to the comics as possible, even while going the other medium. And parts of those things I love, and other parts I cringe at. So,
well, we are down to our last minute or so here, and I could talk to you all day about this. I'm not kidding when I say I am an animation nerd. I've got cells from Real Ghostbusters. I've got cells from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I love animation. I learned animation to do this job. I taught myself animation to do this job. So I could talk to you all day. But what I want to do is remind everybody, head over to Kickstarter. The link is in the comments for the Darkwing Duck graphic novel collections. You have until Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern to back this thing. So go over and give it your money, because it deserves it and it's awesome. Tad, where can people follow you on social media? Where can they find out what conventions you're doing, what appearances you're making, any of that kind of stuff?
On social media, I regret it when I'm trying to hype stuff, but I still jumped off of Twitter entirely. So I'm only on Facebook. I'm on Instagram sometime, but I don't contribute to it regularly. I'm usually checking up on other people's stuff. So I'm on Facebook, kind of on Instagram, and then I'm on Blue Sky, where I follow a lot of comic artists and comic writers. And in fact, Jeff Parker and I have gone back and forth on stuff. And that's just a calmer place to be. As far as conventions, hey, it's up to the fans. People, actually say, hey, can you do a fan? Can you come to Heroes Con or something like that? Yes, I can, if you get Heroes Con to invite me, because it's not like I have a line of comics of my own or that I'm trying to hype or stuff to sell. I have to basically create original art to sell at conventions. But I really enjoy getting out there and meeting fans and all that. So I have to rely on the convention to fly me out, put me up, and they'll do as many panels as they want. So right now, I'm not set for anything that I can think of. There's a couple of people talk to me. So if you've got a con near you that is more than a one-day con,
we'll get that worked out. I'm gonna make some
works for me. Excellent.
All right, guys, stay tuned in just about 30 seconds for Comic Collectibles with Dynamic Forces. They're going to be talking more about this Kickstarter over on that show as they bring you the newest stuff from Dynamite and Dynamic Forces from this week. So thank you once again to Tad Stones for being here. Thank you for creating my childhood. And Jay said it as well. We will see everybody next time.
All right. Stay dangerous.
Twitch. It's not just what happens